I drill my students mercilessly on technique, facility, being clean, being accurate. In no way do I want to minimize that. Ultimately, it's not about that, though. It's about what you're saying. We're making music. What are you saying as a musician? What do you want that phrase to do? How do you want that to go? What sort of statement do you want to make when you play that phrase?
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath. I'm so glad to have you here today. And check out everything that's been going on for the past decade, over almost 300 episodes, at our website, contrabassconversations.com. And I'd love to hear from you. I love hearing people's stories. Do you have an idea for a guest? How about a theme for a show? How about some news? Anything like that. I'd love it if you sent me an email at feedback@contrabassconversations.com. And you're going to love today's conversation with Los Angeles Philharmonic principal bassist Chris Hanulik. Chris joined the LA Phil in 1984. He was appointed principal bass in 1987. And he also served as principal bass of the Cleveland Orchestra. So we talk about all of that, in addition to his early years on the bass, studying with Homer Mensch at Juilliard. We dig into technique, favorite method books, developing expressivity, audition preparation, and much more. Chris is a great guy, and this was a very fun conversation. You're also going to hear a couple excerpts of Chris performing the recitatives from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And you can check out this complete recording, plus an interview with Chris on Hulu. And we have a link for that in the show notes. I'd also like to take a moment and thank our sponsor, D'Addario Strings, and let you know a little bit about their Zyx strings, which use a multi-filament synthetic core, which gives them a rich, colorful, gut-like tone. You can get them in 2 tension options along with a C extension. I'm using them right now. I love the growl. I love the sustain for pizzicato. They got great bow response. They're very cool strings. And you can enter the D'Addario string giveaway just for Contrabass Conversations listeners. You can find the link to that at contrabassconversations.com/strings. And I'd also like to thank Bass Capos for providing the hosting for Contrabass Conversations. Bass Capos are an excellent choice for any bass player looking to implement a double bass extension. They're easy to install, easy to adjust. They're cheaper and more reliable than hand-built latches. They're also lighter and quicker in operation. Learn more at basscapos.com, and thank you to Rob Anzalotti of Bass Capos for providing the hosting. Okay, here we go with our interview with Chris Hanulik.
As you may be aware, not many parents get excited when Jimmy comes home from school and says, "Hey, Mom, I want to play the bass." And the thought of dragging a bass around in the car and all the rest of it. So my dad thought, well, if I can get my son to play the bass, maybe he can drag some of his friends along with him, and I can end up developing some sort of grassroots campaign for a bass section. Anyway, so I was very fortunate in that I had support from a very, very, very young age. I mean, I started playing the bass in 3rd grade, basically, which is on the scale pretty young to be playing bass. But I had a tremendous amount of support from both my mom and my dad. And I had the added benefit of having really good training early on. I wasn't studying bass with a violin teacher who read a syllabus about how to teach bass. I studied with a guy by the name of Robert Genualdi.
Oh yeah, sure. I know that name.
Who went to Northwestern and graduated his music major from there. He was teaching also in Connecticut, in the public schools.
Was he a Benfield student? Or
I believe he was.
Okay, cool.
I believe he was, yeah. So I studied with Mr. G for, I don't know, 5-6 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Then around the time I got into junior high school, my dad started looking at different options for me. And it was then that somebody mentioned the whole Juilliard pre-college division.
Yeah.
And we started, investigating the possibility of heading down to New York on Saturdays. I auditioned for Homer and was accepted into the Juilliard pre-college and stayed with Homer for, the rest of my junior high school years. And then the upper school, I went there with him as well.
Wow.
So
you started early on bass.
I did.
I mean, wow, that's remarkable. Now, did you play any piano or anything like that before?
I never played piano. I played collectively for all of about, you could probably count the hours I played them, but I played trumpet and French horn, for minutes and decided, you know what, this is too difficult. I don't like the embouchure thing. I'm not making any sound here. So, and then my dad, as I said, brought home a bass and said, hey, what if we try this? I went, yeah, what the heck? And it just sort of, I was fortunate that things sort of lined up for me in that regard.
Yeah, I've Rob Kassinger. So many people study with Homer, right?
Yes.
And I was talking with Rob about Homer and what he was like as a teacher. And I mean, that's amazing. That was kind of that era in New York because Homer, he was like kind of like the top call bass player in New York, right? Like playing like every gig. Like, wasn't that the era where it was like it made more sense to do that than the Philharmonic because you're actually?
Well, I think I had discussions with him early on about that. He claimed that he left the New York Philharmonic when he did because he wanted to dedicate himself to teaching.
Oh, okay.
I'm not so sure that that there wasn't another influence in that because when you're working for an orchestra of that size, any of the major orchestras, you don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of taking outside work. You're kept pretty busy, and I think that was a source of frustration for him. So he did a lot of commercial work as well as his teaching. Yeah.
What was he like as a teacher? I mean,
he was great as a teacher, and I still obviously had a profound impact on me as a player. But I would almost say, Jason, he had as much of an effect and an impact on me as a human being.
Yeah,
Homer was just a wonderful, wonderful, warm man. Yeah. And he cared deeply about his students. He looked after his students. He never had any children of his own. And we always theorized that his students were his children. Mm-hmm. And he taught with that sort of approach, and he took care of his students and looked after them. And I just learned so much about him in terms of, because I was exposed to him obviously early on. Yeah. I think I was in 7th grade when I started going down to New York to study with him. Just how he dealt with people, how he carried himself, how he communicated, and he was such a good and kind and warm man that it seemed, no matter who he bumped into when you were walking with him from, a studio to a class or something, he would extend a hand. He would, how are you doing? How are things? And I also, during this period, Homer, very often during the summers, would travel around to these different ASTA string clinics.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And they would be like a week or 10 days at a time. And I would follow him around. He was my teacher, so I would go to this college and then go, follow him to that college. And just seeing how he worked with people, how he communicated with people, it really had a profound effect. And I hope I've managed to sort of carry on some of those traits that made him who he was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. It sounds like such an amazing human being. Yeah, influence on you as a human being too. Yeah. That's absolutely.
As far as his teaching, he was always very organized. Yeah. Very organized. He had his notebook. He would write notes about every lesson, about what we're working on, things you needed to work on, things you needed to improve on. And he was a big proponent of trying to keep a balance within his lessons. He never was the type of guy that would go, okay, let's work on, Bach exclusively. Mm-hmm. Let's work on technique exclusively. Let's work on excerpts exclusively. He tried, as best he could, depending on what you were preparing for, to keep a balance within his lessons of solo work, mm-hmm. technical work, excerpts, and he tried to revisit and focus at least a part of the lesson on each one of those components every week.
Yeah.
And I must say, I try to do the same now with my students, because there's so much that you can glean from the orchestra excerpts, studying context, musical context, understanding strokes, the different strokes between Mozart and Beethoven and Strauss, and to be able to use examples from the orchestra literature to do that was very beneficial.
Did Homer demonstrate a lot, or what was it like in terms of that? Yeah,
absolutely. And it's very interesting too, because I get asked very often. I'm a German bow player, and Homer's a French bow player, and people are always like, "Well, why are you studying with a French bow player?" And it never even occurred to me, Jason, in studying with him, that he played one bow and I played another. It was like it's the bow arm.
Yeah.
Right. You need to produce sound. You need to have strength, agility. You need to be able to execute this stroke and that stroke. Yeah. It was never, what are you doing? Studying with a French bow player. So, the French German thing, it was just never an issue in our lessons. And I know that Homer never, certainly I think there's certain sort of inherent traits to each approach, but he was equally comfortable teaching both, and he demonstrated regularly with both, and he was a terrific player. Yeah, really, really good player.
Was LA Phil the next destination for you? Because I know you were you out? Am I right? Were you out here and then you went to Cleveland? Right. And then we're back. Was that the progression for you?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, okay. I auditioned for the Los Angeles Philharmonic in my senior year at Juilliard.
Okay.
And was fortunate enough to win the audition.
Had you spent a lot of time in California at that point? Okay, so that's it. So you're a New York guy, right? You're like living in Connecticut. You're like that New York energy, and then boom, Hollywood, LA. Like, what was that transition like?
I got asked that a lot early on when I first got out here, and it always left me kind of scratching my head. I was like, well, now let's see. I was a starving student, struggling to make ends meet. And now suddenly I'm playing with a great orchestra, with an amazing conductor, playing the greatest literature in the world, the greatest soloists of our time. And, oh, by the way, I'm making some coin. I have a full benefits package. Living in California, life is pretty good. Is it different than the East Coast? Yeah. But boy, no, I did not have too much trouble adjusting.
Sure. Understandably
to being out here. Yeah.
What was it like going to Cleveland and playing? Can you just talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. Well, it was fascinating. Yeah. I mean, it was fascinating, Jason. The LA Philharmonic was the only professional life I had known, coming right out of school. And I must say, I wasn't at the time of the Cleveland audition really looking for something different. I wasn't, frustrated here. But they called and inquired as to whether I might be interested in auditioning. So I started thinking about it, and I thought of the professional orchestras that are out there. Cleveland has always had sort of that, the Cleveland way of doing things, the mystique of the Cleveland Orchestra. So it kind of piqued my interest. And after thinking about it, I thought, what the heck? Sure, I'll go and, check it out and see what the scene is like. So I did go back there, won the audition, and spent a year there. The Philharmonic here in Los Angeles was very good to me. They gave me a leave of absence and said, we're going to hold your position here. Go ahead and check out Cleveland, and then make sure you come back at the end of the year. And it was a fascinating year for me from a professional standpoint, just to see how another orchestra goes about their business, to see how they go about making music, to see their strengths, their weaknesses, just the whole approach to music making. And from that standpoint, it was fascinating to be a part of that, to immerse myself in that, and to experience that.
And then you came back. Did you come back then in the principal spot and the co-principal back to LA? Is that the progression? Or?
No, I came into the orchestra in 84.
Yeah.
In the section in Los Angeles. In 87, I won the co-principal.
Okay. Okay. So you already had
I was already,
that. Okay, and then
yes,
you came back. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Was Bransby the other co-principal?
He was.
Of the
Yeah.
Okay.
Bruce was,
okay.
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
That's great. I know Bruce is out in Fresno, like super frequently. I
don't know if he's in Fresno, Indiana.
Yeah.
Indiana, Fresno. It's like, Bruce, where are you today? It's Monday. Where are you today?
He was talking through that progression with me of like, it's like got to get Bloomington to Indianapolis to fly out. And he told me the joke. He's like, you won a prize. What'd you win? First prize, 1 week in Fresno. Second prize, 2 weeks in Fresno. But I know that his wife's working out there. And that's great.
Yeah.
So tons of different people listen to this. It's like professionals listen to this, and then a lot of students listen to this, and that sort of thing. And so things that people constantly ask about, like, what's like the undergrad experience look like? Like they start freshman year studying with you on bass. Like, what do you focus on? I know everybody's different.
Sure.
Obviously, it comes in a different place, but like maybe technique wise, or what are those?
I got to tell you, Jason, I'm pretty old school as far as that goes. Scales and arpeggios.
Yeah.
Lots of them.
Yeah.
Again and again and again and again. I'd like to focus early on when I have contact with a student on technique.
Yeah.
Technical facility obviously is key. There's nothing more frustrating, and I've seen it time and again, especially with an instrument like bass, where people very often come to the instrument later than, say, violin or flute. And so as a result, they very often have not had the early training when you take care of fundamentals, when you take care of establishing, these really good technical habits. And so they have some bad habits. And I've seen it so often where someone will come and play for me, and they have great ideas about what they want to say, how they want to say it from a musical standpoint, and they don't have the technical facility to make that happen. And that's a very frustrating situation, because they can sing it for you. They can say, well, I want the phrase to go here. I want it to do this. I want to bring the sound this way. But they don't have it in their hands to make that happen from a technical standpoint, because they've come to it later. They haven't established that foundation. And so for me, the foundation is absolutely critical, because once you establish a good solid foundation, once you establish a good solid technique, then it's almost just like turning you loose. Yeah. It's like you go. And what you want to do, how you want to do it, you are free to do it, because I know you have the ability to execute, and you have the technique to execute what you want to do, when you want to do it, how you want to do it. Yeah. Technique is critical, and really that's the first thing I focus on with most of my freshmen. Yeah. We do, as I say, scales and arpeggios until you want to throw up. Yeah. I do a lot of work with Nanny Etudes, book 1 and 2. Yeah. I like those very much. Book 2 is more about scales and arpeggios again, but book 1, I like to use for strengthening and building dexterity in the bow arm. In the bow arm, okay. The bow arm for me is like a singer's voice. Yeah, the singers spend so much time working and developing, the throat and how they make sound. For me, that's the bow arm for us. It provides the all critical sound production, color, tone, character. Yeah. It's all to me about the bow arm. And so I like to really, really work that very hard as well, and develop, as I say, a lot of strength, agility, dexterity in the bow arm. So that, again, you have at your disposal different colors, that you can choose to execute how you want to, when you want to, but you have it at your disposal to use. I was interviewing Larry Hurst years ago, and he had a line that I think he used frequently, but he's like, the average undergrad walks in 2 years behind in the bow arm than the left hand. But it makes sense, right? Because like the left hand's so much more objective. It's like it's first finger or second finger. Right. It's a D string or G string. Where like it's like more like a paintbrush, in the right arm. And like, does that book help? Like, well, the book 1, what it does is, especially in terms of strengthening the bow arm, because let's face it, there's a certain amount of physical energy that it takes to play the bass. When you look at the size of the instrument, the depth of the instrument, the awkwardness of producing sound on a bass, the gauge of the strings compared to any other string, there's no way around the fact that it takes a certain amount of physical energy to play the bass, to produce sound on the bass at the level that you need to succeed. So book one is really, really helpful because it's not overly challenging in terms of left hand. It does move around the instrument, but it's very sequential in terms of harmonies. You can hear the patterns, you can anticipate where it's going next. But it really, really, if you focus on developing strength in the right hand, developing a big, fat, beautiful, rich sound while doing that, I find it very, very beneficial. Yeah.
Once, so before I do interviews like this, I always like to try to talk to people that know the person or like former students and something. Like the thing that kept on coming up time again about like Chris, I'm like, no, it's a positive. Nothing. It was like, he is the most insanely musical player you're ever going to hear. It's just like expressive. It's like such an expressive player and this might be like an impossible question to answer, but like, how is it a mindset thing? How do people develop that? You know?
Yeah, it's a very good question and not easily answered, I don't think. Certainly I had influences early on, and I because people ask me about my vibrato as well. I think it's safe to say, if you listen to some of my recordings, that my vibrato tends to be a little bit faster than what is considered a traditional bass vibrato. And people ask me, well, why do you do that, et cetera? And I hear a sound in my head that I like. Yeah. And I do what I do to match that sound in my head. I've often thought, my brother's a violinist. He plays in the Colorado Symphony, and we grew up together, and we were always practicing. And my brother was an oboe player, and so there was always music going on in the house. And I don't know if it was the influence of hearing my brother playing the violin or my brother playing the oboe, but I came up with an image of sound and expression in my head that perhaps was influenced by them. And as I say, I simply gravitated towards this. And so it's not a conscious thing, but I often have attributed sort of my approach to those influences of hearing that all the time in the house.
Yeah, that upper string influence.
Yeah, like, I think maybe.
Makes sense.
I think maybe.
Yeah. How's this? So you've been with Los Angeles Philharmonic for quite a while. What's changed over the decades you've been here? Just maybe some broad things. How's the job different now than it was when you started?
Well, certain tenets are always in place. I mean, the orchestra is amazingly quick, and amazingly agile, and that's only over the years been developed to even a finer point. We had 17 years with Esa-Pekka Salonen, and the issues as they pertained to ensemble and accuracy and brilliance that he brought to us and instilled in the orchestra, I think are still on display today. Okay. Certainly the technical ability, and I think this is true across the board when you listen to any instrument. What I hear now compared to when I was sitting on panels and listening in 1984 to string auditions, the level of play is frighteningly good. It's frighteningly good. The technical proficiency, the technical brilliance that so many players now possess is really remarkable. Really remarkable. So that by the time you get down to the semifinals, even the finals, it's really very often a matter of pick 'em. It's sort of great player there, another great player here. It just comes down to a matter of personal preference. But as far as executing what's on the page, the technical proficiency is it's off the charts these days. So
yeah. I'm sure. Yeah. That sort of like leads to another topic that people are always fascinated about. It's like just like auditioning in general, you know, and it's like if we want to have employment as bass players, you know, like that's probably the majority of people listening to this are doing. What knocks people out of that? Maybe just like prelim round. What is it just the basics or like what?
It is. It really is. Because you have to remember, Jason, that early on, we're trying to get through it. Yeah. Early on, we're looking at 70, 80, 100 players. We're trying to get through the process, through listening to all of these players. And it might sound harsh, it might sound cold, but the easiest thing to do up front without any sort of, you know, a level of subjectivity is, are they playing accurately? Mm-hmm. It's the easiest thing to hear and to diagnose. Mm-hmm. Are they accurate? Are they playing in tune? Are they clean? Are they technically executing what's on the page? So technical proficiency, first and foremost, is critical.
What do you do with your students to like get them to that level where they're able to get out of that prelim round?
Yeah,
like
we drill, we drill, and we drill more.
Yeah.
And we do it again and again and again until they can fall out of bed, pick up the bass, and execute, if not 100%, 98%. From a technical standpoint, because it's just, as I say, it's the easiest thing for someone to go, oh, there they go. Mm-hmm. Now look, we're human beings. Mm-hmm. Nobody's perfect. I've never heard a perfect audition.
Yeah.
So if you slip, if you miss a shift, if your string crossing's a little bit sloppy, that is not the end of the audition for you.
Right.
And it's, I've seen this time and time again. Someone's going along playing brilliantly. They come out, they play a concerto. They start the excerpts. Great, beautiful, wide-ranging, terrific. What was that? They screw up a shift. Mm-hmm. They just bomb a string, you know, a shift or something. And there's a momentary pause. And then it's like, not a big deal. Let's go on. You can see the bubble over their head. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They're going, what was that? I've hit that shift 10,000 times without I cannot believe I just did. How could I have? That was ridiculous. I've never met. In the meantime, the audition's going forward, and now they're not engaged. Mm-hmm. They're thinking, they're just still stuck with that blown shift. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, now things start. Oh, God, I wasn't paying attention. What? Now I've missed that. Then I missed, and I know it's easier said than done. I've done the same thing myself in auditions, but you have to develop a mental toughness so that when something doesn't go exactly the way you want, or worse than, you know, you remember being able to do that, you can't let that dictate how the rest of the audition goes for you. Yeah. You know, and it's just, I know it's easier said than done because so much emphasis is placed on technical, you know, perfection today, that as soon as something goes sideways, very often applicants suddenly it comes off the rail. You can't let it happen. You can't let it happen. You've got to think about what you're trying. What I always ultimately I'll be the first to admit, I drill my students mercilessly on technique, facility, being clean, being accurate. In no way do I want to minimize that. Ultimately, it's not about that, though. It's about what you're saying. We're making music. Mm-hmm. What are you saying as a musician? What do you want that phrase to do? How do you want that to go? What sort of statement do you want to make when you play that phrase? You know, in terms of color, that ultimately is what engages the listener, not whether you can do it in tune, you know, and clean and all the rest. It's sort of it's a puzzle. Mm-hmm. It's a puzzle because for those people that say, well, it's all about technique, to a degree, you're right. Mm-hmm. You've got to be able to come out in a stressful situation and be able to execute from a technical standpoint. It is not, however, the only thing. Yeah. And that, I think, is what sometimes gets lost. Mm-hmm. You know, we get so wrapped up in, you know, is it clean? Is it in tune? You know, am I executing really, really nicely? And we forget, well, but what are you trying to say from a musical standpoint?
Right.
What did this composer mean when he wrote this? Yeah. What did he want this phrase to do? Where did he want it to go to? What sort of sound do you want to bring to this? Mm-hmm. It's often a dilemma, because too often we separate the two. They become mutually exclusive. It's like technique, but wait, what are you trying to say from a musical standpoint? Oh, well, we'll get there, but technique. And it's like, you know what? They're not mutually exclusive.
That's a great point.
That you can't suddenly go, okay, I am now technically proficient. Now what do I want to say from a musical standpoint?
Yeah. Alex Hanna, I was talking about, he had this phrase, he always perform, never practice. And he said his piano teacher early on told him it was almost like he had a musical button, like he would forget to have his musical button pushed. And then you push it, and so it's like, if you separate them out, you'll just never get to the musical. So it's like, I like trying to incorporate expressivity even into the technical,
absolutely,
because they're at a high level, they're one and the same,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will admit, it's easier said than done, but you can't divorce the two from each other. Yeah. And I think when you do, you start getting into trouble. Mm-hmm. You start getting into trouble because you're not making music. You're not incorporating it into everything that you do. And I think whenever you have the instrument in your hands, you should be thinking about what sort of musical statement do I want to make? Yeah.
What's it like, and again, kind of a broad question, but being like principal bass of a major orchestra, like how do you lead a section the caliber of like Los Angeles Philharmonic? Mm-hmm. Just in terms of what's that experience like? A super broad question.
Yeah. The less I say, the better.
Yeah. Sure. Right.
I certainly try to lead through example. Yeah. Issues pertaining to ensemble, I try to physically, if there's an awkward pizzicato that is placed somewhere in those 3 seconds, where do we place that as a section? I try to physically show that. But aside from that, I just try and do my job. I try and make sure that I've looked at all the parts. I make sure that the bowings are to my liking. Mm-hmm. If they're not, I come up with bowings that I think will work better and make sure that those are in all the parts so that there's no confusion. And that we can, again, focus on what the conductor's asking for, and we're not going, well, wait a minute, you just did an up bow and my part marked down bow. Yeah. So just technical stuff like that, get that out of the way. And beyond that, just try to make sure that we're producing collectively as a section what I think the composer's asking for. Very often that's related to issues of dynamic. We sometimes need reminding that we need to think about dynamics as a section and not as an individual. Yeah. And what might work, from a dynamic standpoint as an individual, when you times that now by 8 other guys, very often, comes out something else. So just sort of monitoring that type of thing. But, when you've got a great section, there isn't a whole lot that needs to be said.
Well, I got one more question, and you had so much success just like right out of the gate. So I'd love to know, like, just looking back, like if you had any advice for your 20-year-old self, say, knowing what you know now.
Wow. I've been blessed, Jason. Yeah. I really have been. I'm living. I feel like I've been living a dream. Yeah. for the past 30 years, I think. The key that I would remind myself as a 20-year-old is to stay open. Mm-hmm. Stay open to new ideas. Stay open to new concepts. Yeah. Stay open to new music. Stay open to new players. Mm-hmm. Stay open and listening. Always listening. Yeah. Whether it's an instrumentalist, whether it's a vocalist, whatever the case may be. Whether it's classical music or jazz or rock or fusion or whatever, to stay open. Mm-hmm. Because I think when you get into a job like, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, it's very easy to kind of that focus to become much more narrow. Yeah. You're wrapped up in day to day, week to week, what's on the schedule this week, that very often it's like, you forget about what else is happening.
Yeah.
And not a good thing for a musician. I think you always want to make sure that you're listening and aware of what's going on around you.
Yeah. Chris, pleasure. This is great. Well, thanks again, Chris, for chatting. Great to talk with you. Check out links to everything we talked about at the show notes for this episode. And that's going to do it for another episode featuring one of our great interview guests, the hundreds of interview guests we've had. So glad to have Chris on the show. So excited for what's coming up in the future. We've got tons of things in store for 2017 and beyond. And if you're not following along with the show, if you haven't subscribed or you're not on the email list, go to contrabassconversations.com. You can get the app. You can subscribe in iTunes. You can subscribe through Google. You can get on the email list and get the weekly double bass news, plus a Spotify playlist I put together featuring double bassists. I send that out every week. If you're not getting that, I'd love to have you join. We've got thousands of people on the list now, but I would love to have you part of that community. You get stuff you can't get on the podcast or you can't get anywhere online. So thank you so much for listening, tuning in, following along. If you'd like to support this show in any way, financially, non-financially, there are many ways you can do that, and that's all listed at contrabassconversations.com/support. So thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you again soon for more life at the low end of the spectrum.